I'll start off with the definitions of aquatic ecosystems, and then I move towards food web structure, threats, and so on and so forth. So I don't know whether anybody has talked about aquatic ecosystem per se. So yeah. Yeah, what is aquatic ecosystem? An aquatic ecosystem is an ecosystem in a water body, just like in a forest ecosystem or a grassland ecosystem, which are all terrestrial. There's ecosystem which is in the water body is called as aquatic ecosystem, and all communities. Community here, I mean the number of the plant species or animal species that are dependent on each other and live in a fully aquatic or semi-aquatic environment. They are forms the aquatic ecosystems. There are two type of aquatic ecosystem. One is freshwater, the other one is marine. So marine include sea, ocean, and estuarine systems. And in the freshwater, there are two types. That is lentic, that is stagnant, like ponds, tanks, marshes, lake, etc., where there is water doesn't flow, not like river, they are stagnant. They are called lentic ecosystems. The second one is the lotic, which is moving or flowing. That's mainly composed of streams and rivers. So freshwater is defined as having a low concentration, usually less than 1%. So all the plants and animals which are found in the freshwater ecosystems are adjusted to very low salt concentration, and they cannot survive in the area of high salt concentration. For example, amphibians, the frogs which breed in the freshwater ecosystem, they cannot survive even the slightest increase in the salt concentration. They are highly adapted, and their physiology is such a manner that they cannot survive in any of the, even if there is a slightly increase in the salt concentration. So this 1% of the total Earth surface has got fresh water, which is available, and out of which this 1% has got 10% of the total described biodiversity. That's a huge number. We always think that marine has got more number, followed by terrestrial and the freshwater environment. But if you consider the proportion of species present in the freshwater is much higher than the terrestrial and marine ecosystem. That's why the freshwater systems are unique, and in terms of endemism here, I mean that the species found only in one location and nowhere else in the world. That is called as endemicity. And freshwater ecosystem has got highest percentage of endemic species compared to terrestrial or marine ecosystem. That's why the freshwater systems are very unique. Yeah, I'll give you the structure of three different type of freshwater system. One is lake, second is wetland, and this is stream. So lake can be isolated, or it can have one headwater and followed by a small stream following that, or it is followed by a series of drainages, and there will be a pond. The third example what I gave, the drainages with the interconnected nallas or streams are common in Bangalore. Even the high altitude lake like Gurudangmar or Changu in Sikkim, that forms the series of lakes which are interconnected with each other. The similar case can be found in general wetland. Wetland is other than streams and lake, that is the marshy areas where they have either embedded into the larger forested ecosystem, or they'll have a headwater and a drainage. So coming to the stream, stream has got stream ecosystem or stream freshwater ecosystem is very complicated, very complex compared to the lake or marshy systems, because there are different orders of streams. starting from first order where the stream originates or river originates, which does not have any connection with the other stream, that forms the first order, followed by the second order, which is which two first order streams forms the second order, and two third order second order forms the third order, so and so forth. What you see here in the last high order, that seventh or whatever, what you see our Kaveri River or Krishna, Godavari, or Brahmaputra, they're all in the seventh order, that highest order. And our Pala River or Kabini, they are all sixth or fifth order streams, which comes and joins and forms the seventh order river. So, yeah, this is the this basic structure of the freshwater ecosystems. And if you look at this, the structure of the stream, a typical undisturbed forested stream looks like this, which originates from somewhere in the hills and flows downwards, and it has got riffles where you can see the fast flowing stretches of river or a stream with big boulders onto which the water flows and forming a riffle like thing. And as it moves down to the towards flatter and plainer areas, the water is almost slow flowing. Sometimes it looks like stagnated, but it is not. That region is called pools, and in some places there will be waterfalls. Waterfalls is also unique habitat within the stream ecosystem. And the trees and the plants surround during the streams and rivers form the riparian vegetation, which gives a lot of nutrients into the stream ecosystem on which the other organism, maybe it's an aquatic insects or an algae or other fishes and snails can feed and grow and reproduce. So it's a very, very dynamic ecosystem. If you during summer, especially in the southern, where the monsoon induced regions, the streams are very, very dynamic during the monsoon season. If you go to Himalayan region during summer, where there is an ice melt, the streams will be fast flowing compared to the winter season. It's very dynamic, and the interaction of the organism with the river flow and the surrounding vegetation is much more complicated compared to the lake ecosystem. The typical lake or a pond ecosystem looks like this, where it has got a littoral zone and a limnetic zone. So what you see in a Jakkur or Rachenahalli, it doesn't, I don't call it as a typical lake because it has been dredged to make it look like a bowl rather than a saucer shape. A typical lake ecosystem should be like a saucer shape with a gradual slope, not like a kadai or a bowl, which is a steep, what is that, edges, which doesn't harbor diverse biodiversity. So if you look at this structure of a lake, you have the plants of different functional traits occurring at a different depth of the water. And in different depth of water, different type of organisms feed and reproduce. For example, a large egret, what you see in Jakkur or Rachenahalli Lake, like in a purple heron or a gray heron, they feed in the slightly deeper section of the littoral zone compared to the small sandpipers, to the smaller herons. They feed on the narrow or a shallow zone of the lake. And the ducks and geese and pelicans, they mostly found in the limnetic zone, which is open, highly light influenced area of a pond or a tank. This limnetic zone has got two regions based on the light penetration ability. One is photic zone, which is influenced by the sunlight. The second zone is the aphotic zone, which is not influenced by the light. Probably this may not be true for our Jakkur or Rachanalli Lake, because whatever we see here, they are all very shallow lake. The structure what I'm showing is a very deep lake, like a Baikal or a Sulawesi or the Tanganyika, and there may be many. Veena might be able to tell more about this. There are many deep lakes in India also. So based on the temperature zonation, based on the temperature, lakes have been zonation into epilimnion, thermocline, and hypolimnion. The hypolimnion is the region where there's a temperature is much lower than the atmosphere or epilimnion. Thermocline is in between the surface induced temperature to the hypolimnion. This is the typical structure of a lake ecosystem. More or less, it is like that. It changes based on the whether it's in a temperate region or a tropical region, where it's a shallow or deep. But this is the ideal example of a lake ecosystem. If you take a cross section of a lake, of a healthy lake, I'm talking about, it looks like this. And each organism occurs in a different region of the lake. You can see a snail there, and tadpoles, and then newt, all those turtles, and so forth. Each one occurs in a different position in a lake. That is called as a niche partitioning. They partition in a lake where they should eat and reproduce, and they don't compete with each other. So freshwater ecosystem, that's lake and stream, influenced by chemical properties like pH of the water, dissolved oxygen, turbidity, and the conductivity. It's also influenced by the physical features like the temperature, the atmospheric temperature, and water temperature, because they're always constantly, there will be interaction with the atmosphere. The light, the amount of light it receives, the amount of light the freshwater system varies from at a micro scale to the macro scale. And the current is the water current. It may not be major issue in a smaller lake or a pond, but the current influence to a larger extent on in a larger lake on how and where the biodiversity is distributed, and also the occurrence of the nutrient. The final, these two, physical and chemical, influences the distribution and the presence of biological elements or biodiversity in a lake. That has been influenced by the photosynthetic ability of the biological elements which is found in the lake or streams, and the number of and type of macrophytes. Macrophytes are the phytes are plants, macro are bigger plants. And the invertebrates are the insects, worms, snails, and others. And of course, the vertebrates like fishes, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. So, coming to the biotic components of a lake ecosystem, any lake ecosystem for that matter, if you consider, it will have these 4 biotic components. What are those? One is decomposers like bacteria and fungi. The major job of these decomposers are to decompose the organic matter which is present in the water. The second element, biotic element, is the detritivorous. As the name indicates, their job is to feed on dead end and decaying organic matter and shred the larger molecules, organic molecules, into the smaller ones, so that it is available for decomposer to act upon it and release the nutrients, so that it is available for the producer. The producer here are the plants, both macro plants as well as the micro plants. Macro plants are the bigger plants which we can see to our naked eyes, like it could be typha, or it could be lotus, lily, water hyacinth, and so on and so forth. The bigger plants are the macro plants. The micro plants are those algae, which is microscopic green, brown, or blue-green algae, which are found in the pond. The fourth component, most important component in the lake or a stream ecosystem are consumers. Consumers have been divided into two types. First is herbivores, which feeds on plants, which are the producers, which include certain snails, certain fishes, insects, worms, etc. And the second type of consumers include carnivores, that include fishes, reptiles, birds, and certain kind of mammals. Mammals may not be in all cases, but reptiles, fishes, and birds are most common element, carnivorous element in a freshwater ecosystem or lake ecosystem. This is the example or some examples of microplants, that is algae. There are, starting from diatom, which is the there are three black and white images that belong to the diatoms, and others are green algae, and some of them are blue-green algae. They are microscopic, and these microscopic microalgae are most important components, both in terms of good as well as bad. Good in terms of producing the oxygen what we breathe or what the other organism breathe. The algae together from releases nearly 50% of the oxygen what we all breathe. Not only in the atmosphere, but all the oxygen available in the water. It's also released by these kind of microorganisms. They contribute significantly to the oxygen availability for the other organisms. And the macro plants includes all these. They can be classified into emergent vegetation, floating, rooted, floating, and submerged. So if you look at the Jakkur or Rachinalli lake, you can see the cattail shrubs like a sedge, like typha, which is only the roots are inside the water, and 95% of the plant is outside the water. They are called emergent vegetation. They require water, but to the very, very small extent. They are called as emergent vegetation, and there is rooted and floating vegetation, that is mostly lotus and water lily, where they are rooted in the substratum, but their leaves are floating on the water or slightly above the water, maybe in case of lotus. There may be algae, which is a free floating algae, which is found on the water surface, and there are non-rooted floating vegetation. Probably you might have seen the beautiful and evil Eichhornia or water hyacinth. They are floating, not rooted. And there are submerged vegetation in the slightly deeper part of the lake. All these forms the macro plants in a lake ecosystem. A healthy lake ecosystem should have all these 4 or 5 component. Yeah, this is how a typical interaction one can visualize in a healthy lake ecosystem. There are carnivorous fishes, there are herbivorous fishes, there are detritivorous, there are decomposers, there are carnivores, and also there's humans which are making use of this healthy ecosystem for probably for recreation or for the livelihood purpose. So if you can put all the things together into a structure, that's a web structure or a food web structure, how does it look like? It looks like this, what is shared on the screen. There's a producer, decomposer, and the nutrient at the base of the food web, followed by a primary consumers that include snails and zooplankton, some birds like ducks, geese. They're all vegetarians. They feed on aquatic vegetations. There are fishes, which are all which feed on the algae and the aquatic plants. There are carnivorous fishes that form the secondary consumers, and there are tertiary consumers, or what we call as a top carnivorous or top level consumers, where humans are also placed. But what you see, the aquatic food web structure, it is not easy what you have seen. It is very, very complicated. So what we see is not what is actually happening in an aquatic ecosystem. There are so much of interconnection. There are so much of dependence, and it is not one species feeds on the another species. No, each species might feed on multiple species, and the same species might be fed on multiple different type of birds or the reptiles or other mammals. So the structure, the food web structure, is very, very complicated, as indicated in this slide. Hence, if you're managing aquatic ecosystem or a lake ecosystem, to be precise, in your case, one should have, one should look into these interconnections as far as possible, so that you can try to bring back as many elements, biodiversity elements as possible, so that the lake is very healthy. So how the energy transfer happens in a lake ecosystem, it is just like food web structure, where the producers like algae and plants fix the sunlight in the form of carbohydrate, and which has been fed by the primary consumers, which in turn fed by secondary and then the tertiary. And at each level, there's energy loss. And energy loss is greatest as you go from the base of the food web to the top of the food web. The energy loss takes place to the through excretion, respiration, and some amount of their reproduction also. So every step there's a energy loss, and once the organism die or they excrete, whatever the organic matter is available for decomposers to make use of that energy, so that they can also grow and reproduce. Yeah. So all is not well. You are all know about it. So since 1980, 64 to 75, 71% of the wetland has been lost, and ASA has seen the highest loss of wetland since 1980, as you can see in this graph. And Brahmaputra and the Ganga regions are the highly influenced by the human activities. And because of the urban growth, climate change, the availability of fresh water, not only for human beings, but also for the biodiversity, is reduced or threatened to the highest level. If, as you can see in this graph, in this map, that Gangetic region or Brahmaputra region and the peninsular Indian rivers are one of the highly threatened river basins in the world. And coming to the peninsular India, much of the rivers have been dammed. So many lakes have been lost. You know the statistics for the Bangalore, right? From Harini's work and others. How many lakes have been lost in Bangalore? Similar the case for any other, whether you go to Shumagga or go to Chennai, or if you go to Hubli, the Dharwad, the case is similar. Now, the lakes have been sometimes considered as a dumping yard or a wasteland, and the rivers have been dammed, and consequently, the available water for the biodiversity has reduced significantly. There are several species which are dependent solely on this fresh water and not found anywhere else, have been critically threatened or lost from our system. For example, there's a very rare clam which is found in central Western Ghats. There's one population was available in Koina. Because of the damming, that particular species has completely extinct from the Koyna River, and it's available only in 5 small pockets in the Karnataka part and nowhere else in the world. If this region has been dammed, then I'm sure the species will be eliminated from the earth. So 1 in every 3 freshwater species are threatened with extinction, much more than terrestrial and marine. So recently, last month, WWF has come up with the this index, which starting from 1970, and they looked at how the population in the biodiversity has decreased, or the population of the freshwater biodiversity decreased from the 1970 onwards. It shows that 84% of the biodiversity elements have decreased drastically. 84% loss has taken place in the freshwater compared to terrestrial and the marine, which is around 40 to 50%. So what are the issues? Why biodiversity is being lost at such an alarming rate? That's because of the overexploitation, water pollution, habitat degradation, species invasion, and flow modification. So I'll give example for a couple of it. Then you'll appreciate what we are actually doing to our biodiversity. This water pollution, flow modification, and habitat degradation are interconnected because of there's eutrophication. Now, previous speaker talked about the nitrate and phosphate load in the Jakkur Lake, if I'm correct. So, these nutrients, excess nutrients, are causing the eutrophication. The eutrophication is a major influencing factor on water, and which include nutrient enrichment, which also depends on hydrodynamics, which Veena can pitch in here how hydrodynamics can influence the eutrophication process. Environmental factor like temperature, salinity, carbon dioxide, microbial load, biodiversity, and so on and so forth. And occurrence of water eutrophication is actually complex function. Till we know that it's because of the excess nutrient load, it's eutrophication, but it is, according to this, some recent research, said it is not as simple as that. There is much more complex, which is not fully understood till now, it seems. So a healthy ecosystem is on the left side, where you can see a graphical representation of a healthy ecosystem on the left side. On the right side, you see how we actually turn the actual healthy ecosystem into a eutrophic ecosystem. So how does eutrophication in a very simple term happens? It's because of the runoff from the urban area, or leaching from the agricultural surrounding agricultural field, where they apply a lot of nitrogenous and phosphorus based fertilizers. And because of this, there will be huge algal growth, which reduces the oxygen availability, and that will have an implication on the survival of the fishes and other biodiversity. Along with this, a lot of introduced species like water hyacinth, you might be seen in one part of Jakkur Lake or in Hebbal Lake, the beautiful purple flower plant floating on the water. They are South American aquatic plants. They're beautiful flowers, but they are really evil. So they are introduced, they don't have any enemies. When there's slightly increase in the nutrient in the water, they grow like anything, because there is no natural predator to control this invasive species. When they form a mat over the river, not on the water, it reduces the sunlight reaching to the water, thus increase, reducing the photosynthetic ability of the submerged plant, and the process goes on. So this is how once eutrophication happens, this is how the algal mat forms over the water surface, blocking the sunlight and blocking the oxygen exchange between the water and the atmosphere. And this is the image of beautiful flowered water hyacinth, but the kind of damage it does is unimaginable. Still, we know the problem of this, but still we are not very proactive in controlling or managing aquatic invasives. In some of the lakes, they are a bit well managed, but in many parts of India, if you go, they say this, you can see this managed. Along with water hyacinth, there are salvinia. This is also introduced. There are pistia, that's also introduced, and there are a few lemna, and there are a few others which, along with water hyacinth, are degrading our natural water bodies and making much more eutrophic. Once it dies, they once mass flowers and they'll die en masse. Once they die en masse, they add more nutrient into the water, right? And that decomposition of this water hyacinth, once they die, increases the nutrient load, making the water condition even more worse. So the results will be like this. You might have seen in Balandur Lake or Alsur Lake and many other lakes in Bangalore, there's a huge fish mortality. So what causes fish kills? Obviously, one, yes, because of eutrophication, but that is results due to the low concentration of dissolved oxygen. And also during hot summer, the warm water holds less dissolved oxygen compared to cold water. That's also, along with the high nutrient content in water, kills the fishes. Okay, and algae, which produces oxygen to the photosynthesis during early morning hours, and in the night when they don't photosynthesize, they respire along with the others, and thus taking away a lot of oxygen into it, and thus reducing the oxygen level in the water. That also causes the fish death. And of course, apart from these, there are toxic elements which are released by the industries, also responsible for the fish kill in the aquatic system. So how do you manage this nutrient load? This is a simple graph which explains, what kind of what kind of plants contribute to the primary production in the aquatic ecosystem. If you want to manage a pond, if you know that these kind of what kind of macrophytes to be planted or managed, that will have a great implication on the health of the aquatic ecosystems. Okay, the another cause of concern to the aquatic ecosystem is the heavy metal pollution, mostly arsenic, cadmium, chromium, copper, nickel, lead, and mercury. And they are mostly come from the point or non-point sources, probably in Jakkur and Rachinhalli. Correct me if I'm wrong, Veena. So there are mostly non-point sources from the urban runoff and surrounding areas, Daraj and other places. So that the non-point sources are much more difficult to manage compared to the point sources. Point source, the greatest examples come from all those tanning industries along the river Ganga in Uttar Pradesh. They directly release a lot of untreated water into the river. That forms the point sources, and all the urban runoff or runoff from the agriculture forms in non-point sources. So these metals become locked up in the bottom of the sediment. When it gets into the ecosystem, most of them become locked up in the bottom of the sediment, or some of the metals like mercury, lead can become a bioactive and get into the system, the biotic system, and causing the damage. These heavy metals can also change pH, increase the algal bloom, and finally human health, um, who are dependent on this aquatic system. So if it gets into the plant, this heavy metal, they'll be transferred along the trophic level. As I showed you the food web, where the plants fix this energy and photosynthesize, and it's been consumed by primary consumer, then by secondary, and then tertiary. And when it accumulates into the plant, it will be consumed by the primary consumers and followed by secondary consumers, and goes up in the trophic level. And this is called as biomagnification. So biomagnification is also known as bioamplification or biological magnification. This is nothing but the concentration of a toxin, such as pesticide or heavy metal, in the tissues of the organisms, successively at the higher food chain. One of the classical example of the biomagnification, it comes from the American bald eagle. That's a national bird of North America. Americans are very proud of that bird because huge eagle, beautiful black, white head and black body. What has happened to that? Population has declined significantly because of three reasons. One is habitat destruction and modification, probably the hunting and all kind of things. And the third major problem was from the biomagnification of DDT. You know, DDT, which was used as a pesticides in the agriculture, got accumulated in the water, then is passed on to zooplanktons, to fishes, and the larger fish. The bald eagle and osprey and those kind of organisms, they feed on this secondary consumer fish. Consumer fishes. So these fishes have already accumulated the pesticides and heavy metals that gets accumulated successively, as shown in this figure. What has happened in the bald eagle was the eggshell have become very thin due to the DDT accumulated in the body. DDT has influenced the reproductive system. So that has led to the eggs with very thin shells, eggshells. When the bird sat on it for incubation, the eggs used to get damaged. So this is the kind of impact the pesticides and heavy metals are influencing the biodiversity. This is one example. There may be many other impact on the biodiversity elements. So what can be done to reduce the pollutant? One is the very eco-friendly and biological way of reducing without using any chemical is the bioremediation. Bioremediation is the process is to treat contaminated media by altering environmental condition, and usually using micro and macro organisms like plants. So where they absorb these the pollutants and they store it in their stem and leaves. I know that there are problems with this. We can discuss about it in the discussion section. So one of the effective way of treat the polluted water is to go for bioremediation. There are a lot of studies has happened across the world to show that how bioremediation is actually helping in purifying the water. Our Dr. Priyanka Jamwal from Atri, I think she's also working along with Veena and others on using plants in purifying what our previous speaker also spoke a little bit about it. So yeah. So other causes of biodiversity decline in aquatic system is the water abstraction. Excessive water abstraction also changes the water dynamics. As I was telling, in the case of stream ecosystem, if you take, they are very dynamic system. This species, the fishes or insects, or for that matter, plants are adapted to that kind of dynamism in the ecosystem. If you alter the flow, alter the flow of water, then these fishes or insects or worms will be under severe stress. So they can't survive such a dramatic changes induced by humans. So that will have an implication on the survival of the biotic elements. The dam. The second thing is the dam, and our own colleagues' work has shown that the downstream of the dam as well as the upstream of the dam has got a different type of fish communities. Ideally, you should have the similar kind of fish communities because it's a continuum. It's a continuous stretch. Once you dam, the upstream will become more of a lentic system. The kind of organism adapted to that lentic system will be different from those which are adapted to the lotic system. The downstream, what will happen is because of the blocking of the water flow, the stream will become dry, and those organisms which are obligate, water dependent, have gone extinct, or the population has declined drastically. Our own colleagues' work has shown that. The dynamic fishing, especially in the ponds and the rivers, have got an implication on the larger biotic structure of aquatic ecosystem, because dynamic fishing, dynamite fishing is not specific. It can kill anything wherever they have put the dynamite. So this is one of the most damaging kind of fishing, which even now, though it is banned, but still occurs in some parts of Western Ghats, which I have seen personally. So encroachment also leads to the habitat degradation and habitat quality. And finally, the invasive species. A little bit I spoke earlier about the plants. There are other invasive species like African catfish, which can grow to the really big size, and it's not consumed by humans, and they are the potential competitor for the smaller native fishes. And as you know, the smaller native fishes cannot compete with the larger voracious and aggressive fish, and pushing the native fish to the extinction. So invasive species such as it could be tilapia, introduced species like tilapia, or invasive species like African catfish, or pacu, or gambusia, are all creating a major havoc in our aquatic ecosystem. We don't have any policy as of now to manage invasive species for the conservation of biodiversity, be it in the terrestrial or aquatic ecosystem. So right now we are here,
Arvind, we are running short on time. I was wondering, there's a lot of very interesting questions.
Yeah, this is the last slide.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the we are here in the 2020, but we don't want to further bend the curve. We have to elevate this curve to bring our rivers or ponds and tanks to life. So we have to take necessary action to conserve aquatic ecosystem. Thank you very much, Veena. Thank you all of you for patience.